Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cinema Psych podcast, where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and today we're going to have a little fun with maybe a recent American, wink, classic, American Psycho. I mean, it's not a cup of tea for everybody, but I think one thing we can all agree on is that it is well acted, an intriguing story, but definitely well acted. I do have some qualms about the end, which I will get to, but Christian Bale turns in an amazing performance of a guy that is living on the edge of something, you know? So this episode is going to be a solo episode. Every once in a while, I'm going to throw these in there. I did one at the start of the podcast, of course, that episode 0. And then back in December of 2019, I did another one. And so every once in a while, I'll throw in a solo episode. Me and my colleagues are just finishing up the school year, and a bit of a challenging school year, of course, with the coronavirus pandemic. So I thought, I can just do this story on my own, and this show on my own, so we can then regroup for future episodes, of course. So today's episode, obviously, is about American Psycho, which came out in 2000, okay? So it's about 20 years old now, 20-year anniversary. And the reason why I picked this movie, I'll be honest with you, my interest was piqued because a friend of the show, Win Good Friend, sent my name off to a writer for Unilad or Uni-LED, however you pronounce it. And he asked me some questions about American Psycho as a psychologist and also as the producer of this podcast, of course. And I gave him my thoughts. He very nicely included me in his piece. So I'll talk about that piece in a little bit, but that's the main reason for choosing this. I think if I hadn't been approached to give my thoughts on the film, I wouldn't have watched it again recently, and I don't think I would have picked it to be on the show. I mean, it'd eventually be on the show. I think it's as you'll hear, it's definitely got potential to be discussed in in a psychological context. Now, with the whole killing and the blood thing and the psycho part, I don't know if thematically it's right for a classroom setting, but I mean, to each their own. I've shown some R-rated stuff before, and you always want to get the buy-in and have an out for or an alternative assignment for anyone who doesn't want to partake, and that's okay. So American Psycho came out 20 years ago, right? And it's got like I said, a stellar performance by Christian Bale, one of his early adult career gigs, where he wasn't really a huge name. Like, he wasn't a huge name. And not until like mid 2000s. So we're still like 4 or 5 years out from him being like a massive hit. And so, he stars in this little indie film that was based on the novel by Brent Easton Ellis about a New York white guy who gets away with anything, right? New York investment banker is what it seems like, and gets away with possibly killing people, right? And it was directed by Mary Harron. It was written by Mary Harron and Guinevere Turner. They did the adapted screenplay, and I gotta say, minus a few issues, like I said, I have with the way that the story ends, which is not the same as the book. It's actually a well done. It's well directed. It's well written. And I think they do a fantastic job making the content more about Patrick Bateman, Christian Bale's character. I'm sure you've heard Patrick Bateman before. They do such a great job of making the film about more than just Patrick Bateman and the title of the film being American Psycho. Like we can expand beyond that, of course, right? And we can kind of look at all of the themes that they wanted to highlight. With this film being set in the late 1980s, even though it came out in 2000, and how unnervingly similar the picture looks then as it does now, right? It's just like, oh man. And so there's literally not enough hashtag Me Too to like cover this film, because it is so egregious in many of the ways that we don't find acceptable at all right now these days. So you kind of just like, you cringe at it, like, oh gosh, this was 2000, but also in the 1980s. Oh god, that was only 20, 30, 35 years ago. Oh man, that's a generation. That's the generational shift right there. So, most of this episode is probably going to focus, of course, on Patrick Bateman, because it is a character-driven narrative. So there's not much else by way of plot. There is obviously a loose plot going through the entire film, but it is a character drama, and we're actually just interested in the character of Patrick Bateman himself, rather than making sure that there's a conflict and a rising action, and then the crescendo. I forget all of my narrative terms there. And the resolution and all of that. So the first thing I want to talk about is Patrick Bateman's life and his sense of self, and he explains it to the audience very clearly, because he's the narrator of his own story. Now, should we think of him as an unreliable narrator? I think that would make a lot of sense. It would make a ton of sense to treat him as an unreliable narrator. And I'll get to my reasoning behind that in a little bit. But in the beginning of the film, you're introduced to Patrick Bateman, and he's going through an interesting routine. He's taking a shower, he's washing his face, then he's putting on a number of creams, and then he puts on a clear facial mask product. And all the while he's doing this, he's explaining everything about his routine and how he makes himself look like him. And strikingly, he says this one thing about himself. I'll let Patrick, he says that there is this potential, this abstract concept for Patrick Bateman, but he doesn't really exist. So we're immediately introduced to a guy who is in the middle of something happening, and he doesn't really know what it is to be a functioning member of society. He kind of just gets to do what he wants, and he acts a certain way, he dresses a certain way, he makes himself look a certain way to play a role on, as Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, right? And so he's playing some role of Patrick Bateman. Of course, Patrick Bateman can be anyone. Well, any rich white male, right? He can be anyone. And they actually make a point of this throughout the film where he gets confused for other people, which sends Willem Dafoe's detective character sort of off on a kind of a wild goose chase. Never really able to pin the disappearance of Paul Allen, played by also a young Jared Leto, but still around Jared Leto's acting time. Like, this was Requiem for a Dream time. So, a small bit role for Jared Leto, but a great one as Paul Allen. Not to be confused with the Microsoft Paul Allen, of course. So we're introduced to Patrick Bateman, quote unquote. Whether or not that is a real human with real human wants and needs, that's up for the viewer to decide, I guess. Right? So I would characterize this as a walk down the sense of self lane. If we were gonna toss this into psych concepts, his sense of self seemingly exists as an amalgamation of his particular social group's idea of what he should be. Okay. And I think maybe this feeds the psychological issues that he ends up displaying throughout the film. And that's kind of what I want to talk about next. I think that's the biggest part of the film, right? The title says American Psycho, so you're like, oh, okay, he's a psychopath. He's a psychopath, and he kills people while listening to Huey Lewis in the news. I mean, I gotta say, that in and of itself, if that was the only scene that I had seen in this film, I would be like, wow, that's actually brilliant. What a clever use of an unhinged guy, and the angles of the interaction with Christian Bale, Jared Leto, the music, the going back and forth across the apartment. Like, it's a fantastic scene visually. And this is not the medium for a visual, but I mean, I'm going to go ahead and play you the full scene, of course. And what I want to highlight here before I get into the actual psychological disorders that myself and others have mentioned in that Unilad piece, or which, by the way, I'll link in the episode notes for this episode. The idea that Mary Harron had for this particular scene was not to focus on the gruesome violence of the scene, which is fairly gruesome. Patrick Bateman takes an axe to Paul Allen. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't know if I'd want to get murdered by an axe. I feel like that would be very blunt in many ways. And if you didn't get hit in the neck first, like, that would be pretty damn, like, if you didn't get hit in the neck first, and then also the blows were far apart, oh my God, that would be so brutal and gruesome. And in this scene, Mary Harron decides, you know what? Nope, I'm going to focus completely on Christian Bale's face. And she actually takes the close-up tighter. Like throughout the shot, it gets subtly tighter and tighter and tighter on Christian Bale's face, which I think is wonderful as you see the really small amounts of blood splatter. You would think there's more, but small amounts of blood splatter onto his quote-unquote perfect face and his quote-unquote perfect teeth, even though he's wearing goggles. I think the blood would have gotten on all of his perfect blue eyes. I think they're blue. You could possibly get lost in them, I suppose. And all the while, it's just focused on Patrick Bateman, which I think is a brilliant visual way to, one, get away from, getting this film rated NC-17, but two, kind of highlight Patrick Bateman instead of the murder, right? Highlight the person instead of the behavior, right? Behavior is obviously awful. And it's obviously a part of somebody who kills for sport or kills for pleasure, that sort of thing, right? Like your serial killers like John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy, whatever, where they get some sort of satisfaction from it. And he seems to get some sort of satisfaction from it, I suppose. But it's more about him as opposed to the deed that he is doing. While Huey Lewis in the news is playing in the background, hip to be square. It's hip to be square, because that's what Patrick Bateman is. He's square. He's a square guy. Square in the sense that he's kind of a nerd and he's bookish and forgettable and not fun, not outgoing, things like that, right? So it's a fitting song for a fitting. Let's talk about that Psycho thing. Okay, so like I said, we're going down this road of what is going on in Patrick Bateman's head. Okay, so there's two thoughts about this. So Cameron Frew, who wrote the piece for Unilab, contacted a psychoanalyst named Steve McCown. I'm hoping I pronounced that right. He is a clinical clinician of some sort, and I am not. I want to put that out there that I am not. He's not wearing goggles. I just noticed the scene. He's not wearing goggles. Yeah, so he's getting it all over his pretty eyes. But in any case, Steve McCown watched the film and seemingly comes up with narcissistic personality disorder. Okay. And so this disorder, according to the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders 5 from the American Psychiatric Association, not to be confused with other APAs like the American Psychological Association or the American Physiological Association or the American Physics Association, so on and so forth. APA, come on now, let's get it going. Anyway, so the definition of NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, includes things like exhibits exaggerated feelings of importance or self-importance, an excessive need for admiration. I've got some real choice scenes for that one, and a lack of empathy toward others. Okay, so let's go through each of these. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, of course, but it exhibits exaggerated feelings of self-importance and the excessive need for admiration. The scene that epitomizes these two things is incredible. It's the business card scene, mostly narrated by Patrick, But then here we have a bunch of dudes that are working in the same office, this, investment banking office. We have no idea what they actually do because it's not actually important. They're all just filthy rich, and they flaunt it. But the idea is about the self-importance and need for admiration is embodied in these cards. And these cards look exactly the same to any layperson, to any schmo walking down the street. Like, hey, here are these two cards. Do they look the same? Yeah, they do. But no, it has to do with how Patrick embodies the subtle changes, the bone as opposed to clear white, the lettering, the capitalization of the first name versus the last name. They all of their cards say executive VP or executive vice president. So it's not like any of these guys are any different from one another. They're all white. They all have slick black hair. They all wear suits. They all have these really boring, I'll say it, boring business cards. And yet, because Paul Allen had a better business card than Patrick, here you go, Paulie. You did. So, you get on Patrick's bad side and you end up meeting your doom at the blade of a really well-polished axe. It's incredible, actually. It's incredible. Okay, so and lack of empathy toward others. Well, I mean that's clearly the case in many scenes, but one scene in particular at the beginning of the movie when you think he'd murdered somebody and he's trying to get the blood out of dry cleaning and he's yelling at it's based in New York, of course, because these investment bankers work on Wall Street. So, I mean, he's yelling at, I believe they are of some East Asian descent at the dry cleaners because they can't understand what he needs and what kind of linen it is and whatnot. And they're trying to tell him, no, we can't get out blood. And he's like starting to say very racist and very bad things, So, yeah. I'd say he checks all those narcissistic personality disorder boxes. What do you think if you've seen the film? I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. Do you agree with this clinician or not? The other thing Steve says in this piece is that he has borderline personality disorder. He's very emotionally unstable. He has extreme thoughts and acts without too much thought. Which makes him extremely dangerous. Now, I don't know a lot about borderline personality disorder, so I will only give my 2 cents as far as what I've seen of these things in the film, because he does. These are characteristics of somebody with borderline personality disorder, definitely emotionally unstable, though I will say that it appears he has some sort of triggers with this. It has to do with, I would imagine, his ideas of masculinity, and the fragile, white masculinity that he expresses in the film, which is so well done by Mary Harron, by the way, and Guinevere Turner, taking that, narrative and putting it on the screen like it is. But in any case, he does all of these things. I think borderline personality disorder is one of those disorders that has clear. This is from my perspective. Again, I'm not a clinician, but has clear behavioral markers. Right? We can see this, and that quote unquote diagnosis, I think is better than one that you might hear a person without any training in psychology. I'm not talking about me because I do have training in psychology. It may not be clinical psychology, but I do have, some training in it, just some. And you contrast what professionals of psychology might characterize as behavior versus what somebody else would, and that word is psychopath or psychopathy, right? Or sociopathy, and there are no clinical definitions for those two things. There's no clinical definition for what that is. Okay, for what psychopathy is and what sociopathy is, and if you want to catch a previous episode, take a listen to the Dark Triad stuff in episode 13. Wind, good friend, and I discussed the film Joker that just came out in 2019. And the Dark Triad personality traits as it speaks to psychopathy, okay, or somebody being a psychopath. So I want to mention that psychopathy is not, like I said, it's not clinical, okay. At now. Because now psychopathy is classified as antisocial personality disorder, okay? Or dissocial personality disorder. So when you hear the term psychopath, you kind of have to take a step back, and you're like, okay, well, what are traditional psychopaths, right? You have the antisocial behavior, which, is impaired, which also includes impaired empathy and remorse. We see those in the films. And then bold, disinhibited, and egotistical traits, right? That's all apparent there. So that's why I think American Psycho just works, because you have the idea of what psychopathy is, and you're like, oh yeah, that guy's a psychopath. He's a psycho, right? And he's American. There you go. Roll credits, right? So, but we should use antisocial personality disorder if we're going to be talking about clinical. Now, it is used somewhat in the criminal justice system because it has consequences. Acting in this way, acting in a psychopathic way, has implications for what sort of punishments or consequences the individual is going to have. Okay, so this is an interesting foray into the language that we use to describe somebody. Is he a psychopath? Well, yeah. But if I was going to sit and try to diagnose him as a clinician, I wouldn't be like, dude, you're a psychopath, man. Why are you killing all these people? I'd be like, it seems to me that you suffer from some personality disorders that are typically seen as dangerous and potentially harmful to folks, right? So we don't want to call these people crazy, insane, mentally ill, right? Also, a psychopath might have an idea of what they're doing, might be fully aware of what they're doing. And if we were gonna label Patrick Bateman as as one or the other, I would say that maybe he is aware of what he does. Now, here's the kicker. So now you don't have to have all of the symptoms to be classified. So like, well, it doesn't have one, so he's not it. Okay, time to move on. We need to find other people. No. One of the things that I think is very striking to me, one of the traits that is expressed by psychopathy / antisocial personality disorder, I'll just combine them for the sake of this argument, is that the impaired empathy and remorse. So here's the thing that I wanted to mention about how the ending doesn't really tickle me very much. So toward the end of the film, Patrick essentially feels like the detective is going to corner him at just figuring him out, knowing that he killed Paul Allen, right? And so he kind of has this breakdown. I'll come back to the idea of a breakdown as well. Like, I have so many layers of this. There's so many layers of this analysis. So he goes on essentially a killing spree because he's running away. And then he finally makes it to his office and he's like, whoa, I got to call my lawyer. And he's crying. He's like, I did it. I did all of it. I killed them all. I killed this guy over here. I killed this woman over here. I killed Paul Allen. You need to help me, and so on and so forth, right? He's leaving this all on this lawyer's answering machine. And so this impaired empathy and remorse, does he have some sort of empathy and remorse for the actions that he did? I actually think yes. I'm probably in the minority in this one, but it's how I read the end. And what happens at the end is that he finds his lawyer the next morning in this restaurant. And his lawyer is essentially saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who you are. I had lunch with Paul Allen in London, which was part of the fake alibi, so to speak, for Paul Allen's disappearance, right? So he's like, I had lunch with Paul Allen in London. Please, sir, let me go. I don't know who you are. And this was preceded by a visit to the to Paul Allen's apartment, where he had stored a number of bodies and pretty much had a very gruesome setting over there, because he one of the other things that he did was only have sex with sex workers, and then he pretty much killed them most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time he killed them. And so that was pretty much what his sex life was sex workers. And he goes in, he's frantic, and he's asking the realtor who is selling it, this is Paul Allen's place. Why is it not dirty? And she's like, I think you need to leave. And you're like, oh, okay. So all of that happened. He goes and sits downs. He goes and sits. Wow. With his coworkers, his quote unquote friends, and the camera just tightens the close up on him. It's just a nice tracking tight shot coming into Patrick Bateman's face as he's narrating about how he feels about what just happened and how he's coming to terms with it. And he says that this prison has not given him a release. He doesn't feel free from whatever it is that he is suffering from by the world cleaning up his white man mistakes. Right? There is a huge bit of undertone there that the remorse is there. I strongly believe it, and I will gladly I will gladly debate anybody who feels that he does show zero remorse, and I'm mostly with you on it, but I really think there is some remorse. Now, what is the release that he wanted? Maybe he did want to go to jail. Maybe he wanted to be free of the urges and issues of what he considers a fake world, what he considers a fake person in Patrick Bateman, right? If he had to go to jail for murdering Paul Allen and other people, maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to put up the charade anymore. And that's obviously mucho speculation, but I think it's there. I think there are underpinnings there. The problem is it ends right. The film just ends there. It just ends on his face in that tight one shot, close up, and you're like, wait a minute, what? No. We need to explore that a little bit more. I understand it seemingly brings the entire narrative around, like a nice tie little bow on the narrative, but I feel like it ends too abruptly. And I may also be in the minority there as well. But I feel like as far as pacing goes, like the last 15 minutes are really, really, really hurried. And they don't necessarily need to be. So yeah, that's and narratively speaking, filmmaking speaking, that's my only major qualm, is that it ends a bit too suddenly, a bit too early. I think we could have explored that a little bit more. Oh, maybe. Okay. The last thing that I wanted to discuss was one major theme that I picked up in for the entire film, and it goes back to an earlier comment that I made when I first started describing the film in the episode, and that was that the film was made by two women, I think, that who wanted something to say or had something to say about the role of pornography and the treatment of women in this time period. You know, you get asked the question, you know, it's endured for 20 years. Why is it still so popular when clearly Patrick is an unlikable guy? And I disagree with the fact that he's an unlikable guy. I think on its face, I think anybody could be. I mean, we get to know him intimately, but I think if you were to meet him, you would be like, oh yeah, he's nice looking. And so I think Christian Bale's performance is the main thing that has led this going. But I think also it gives us a window into, yeah, this is actually really crappy for its treatment of women. Like this time period was awful. And, you know, other time periods notwithstanding, of course, because those were also awful, especially ones before that. Right. And so I think it was a funny observation that I made when I was answering questions for the interview. You know, some people might actually like Patrick Bateman for his removal of one yuppie butthole in Paul Allen. Like, oh yeah, kill Paul Allen. What a douche. You know, you're like, yeah, do it, man. Kill that guy because he sucks. You know, that's certainly a take. But I think what's the bigger take here is the themes of power and control and treatment of women. And it's very subtle all the way through. Although 20 years later, I think it's actually fairly easy for anyone to pick out what doesn't fit, what's not going to fly in 2020 kind of behavior, right? He treats he objectifies his secretary, his assistant, and tells her what to wear and what not to wear, what makes her look good, what doesn't make her look good. He asks her out on a date. He almost kills her, but then he is interrupted. And then she eventually finds his journal. The only sex that we see him have is with sex workers. And he works out in the morning to pornography on his TV. Like, it does squats and stuff and crunches and push-ups with porn on. And you just got to wonder, like, what? This is actually a really important piece of information about who Patrick is, right? Obviously a young, powerful man, but also being a young, powerful, especially white man, is incredibly important to thinking other people, especially, another gender, are beneath you, and that you have control over them, that you can make them do whatever they want because you have money, and you can treat them however you want because nobody's going to get in your face about it. And we find that out later, of course. Nobody's going to get in your face about it, and it's all going to be smooth sailing, and I can do and say whatever I want. And I think it's very well done because it's not too in your face. You kind of have to pick it out. It's not the thing that's most glaringly obvious at you. And I think it's a really, I'm just going to say it. I think it's a really good movie to describe how even just obviously the movie's set in 1988 or something like that, and the movie was made in 2000. But even in a generation, you can say, well, look how the elite class, the upper class, were able to operate, and this is America, Donald Glover, right? So, yeah, it's relevant, and I think it's a useful, of course, there's a lot of useful popular media out there for discussing women and gender issues, but I think this is a good one. I think this is a real good one because it's not too in your face. Yeah, that's what I'll say. But I have actually one more thing that I wanted to say. And that is, I want to put a little worm in your brain about one thing that each time I watch the film gnaws at me, just like this brain worm is going to do to you. If you want to watch it again with this top-down knowledge, I implore you to do so. It's an interesting one. So we talked about how Patrick is probably just a narcissist with antisocial personality disorder. Okay. Kills people for fun. Shows little to no empathy or remorse. And is emotionally unstable. Sure, that's probably right. The clues that you get at the end were that, he because he was so rich and powerful that he got his stuff cleaned up for him. But what if we were to take the path of, did any of it happen? Did any of it happen? And I'll give you a couple of points for this one. Now, one of the points I'll say does require you to know a little bit more about the background, the behind the scenes of the film. So if you're not familiar with it and you're not like super invested in knowing the difference, like my second point's really not going to get you. So my first point is that this never all happened, was that it goes back to my earlier point of him seemingly like he has some remorse and maybe he wants some freedom from the demons that exist inside him, right? And so he has some semblance of reality, but also a break from it. So yeah, the point I'm trying to make is that he is suffering from some sort of psychotic break. Goes back to, so my second point is that it goes back to him thinking that Patrick Bateman is a concept, is an abstract concept that exists in some way, right? My third point, this is the more outlandish one. My third point is, so I recently watched a video on YouTube. Now I can't remember what it was called, but I recently watched a video on YouTube about the movie and about American Psycho. And one of the things that I learned was rather interesting, and I think is evidence for my psychosis point. Mary Harron told Willem Dafoe to act each scene like in three different ways. One, like he knew that Patrick killed Paul Allen. Two, he didn't know and he had no idea that Patrick killed Paul Allen. And three, that he was unsure. He was trying to figure it out. So a little bit more suspicious, but also trusting. Suspicious but trusting would be the third one. And she filmed Willem Dafoe doing this 3 times in every scene that he was. And then she went back with her editor and spliced in each of those performances. So every time the camera cuts from Patrick to the detective, Willem Dafoe, it would be a new way that he did it. And then it would cut back to Patrick, and then it would cut back, and it would be in one of the other ways. Cut back to Patrick, and then it'd be the other way, right? And so imagine you are Patrick in this moment, and you're like, does he know that I killed him? And you're like trying to catch all of the subtle ways in which knowledge changes our nonverbals, right? How we make our facial expressions, our intonations, and all of these things, our inflections, all of these things are come from us based on what we already know. And if we're having a conversation about knowledge and trying to figure out questions, you know, an interrogative sort of situation, of course, the way that you ask questions and receive answers is going to change based on those 3 ways. And so you have Patrick Bateman, who's like, wait, what? Does he know? No, he doesn't seem to know. Wait, I'm not sure. And so that obviously leads then to the interesting exchange at the end where he thinks that he's been found out, and then goes on the murder spree because he doesn't want anybody running into him or, you know, running off and telling someone. So, yeah, did it all happen? Now, you could interpret the 2 scenes that I said of the end, the one at the restaurant interrogating the lawyer who's like, I don't know who you are, and then the scene right before that where he's at Paul Allen's thing and there's nothing is clean and she says you need to leave. These could all also be real responses to his break with reality. Like, who are you? Get out of my face. Yeah, Paul Allen's in London. I had lunch with him 10 days ago. You want me to call him? Like, did Patrick really kill him? I don't know. The realtor at Paul Allen's thing. You need to leave. The look she gives him, maybe, is, we know what we did for you. Stop being here because you're being placed at the scene of crime. Please leave. Or it could be like, hey, crazy person, I don't like the cut of your jib, and I think you need to leave. Right? It could be just that. It could be just that. So, is he a psychopath or is he psychotic? I don't know. I think it's a good question, though. And I think it's a question that I will leave you with. Thanks for listening to this solo episode of the Cinema Psych podcast. I really appreciate all of the support I've heard from a number of you over the last several weeks, and I really do like hearing that people are listening and that they really enjoyed this episode or that episode, and keep it up, that sort of thing. And so, again, I'm going to keep up with the challenge because I think it's a great challenge. And if you can keep doing it, please keep doing it. Hey, maybe you don't know 15 people because you did the last 2 episodes worth of 5 people. But you know what? I'm going to give you the same challenge. I would like you to now find 5 new people to share this podcast with. 5 new people. Not the same ones that you shared with before. 5 new people and say, hey, I know you like this movie. Listen to this guy talk with this other person, unless it's American Psycho. Then listen to this guy talk to himself about this film and the psychology in it. Guess what? You're going to learn something and it's going to be amazing. You know, tell somebody they're going to learn something in an enjoyable way. Boom, you've got you're sold. You're sold. You've sold it, right? You've sold it. 5 new people. 5 new people. Share an episode. Share the show with them. Get people talking about this. I mean, again, people are listening and people are sharing, and I just want to keep it going. I just want to keep it rolling. I think I enjoy every moment of doing this show. And on that note, until next time, thanks for listening.